Hello everybody and welcome back to another edition of Archive VFX. Today's video is going to be a quick run back through Softimage 3D. My initial plan was to do a video with Houdini, 4.1 probably, or 5.5, something here. And I'm going to put that off for a little while. I have to figure out the licensing with the rendering. The whole app works except for the render engine says it doesn't have a license, and so I have to mess around with some of the HKey lock files and see what I did. So in the meantime, today I thought I would go over, revisit Softimage 3D. The two Softimage videos that I did were the first two videos that I made on this channel. And they were both recorded with my iPhone on a little tripod facing the old SW1600 monitor. Which worked out okay, you know, it got the point across. But I figure I want to revisit that first video and just make a little basic scene with it because I am, we're capturing the desktop, and just to run through that process really fast. So let's fire up here. We got, not XSI. We'll do XSI in another video here. We'll do Softimage Extreme. And we'll do a quick rundown of some basics and build a better render. The first one that I did was, was a sphere and a cube, and I'm gonna do like three things. We'll put a checkerboard on the floor, on the grid geometry. When I first moved to Los Angeles in 1995, Softimage was in its prime, and the 1995 SIGGRAPH, the SIGGRAPHs back in those days were like being a kid at Willy Wonka's chocolate factory if you're into CGI and animation, because it was a whole, expose of hard to get software and hardware all gathered in one place. There was the Pixar people and the Alias Wavefront people and the Softimage crew, and of course all the Silicon Graphics machines were there. And so in 1995 I did probably sit at a Softimage workstation a little bit longer than the demo crew wanted a person to sit at a workstation. But here's the Softimage 3D app interface, and let's see what we remember here. We can do, here's our perspective view, our top view, front view, right view. If we hold the W key, it'll put this little square here, and then we can drag the windows around. There are, I believe these are the ways to, you can press this and make it the whole screen and click it to go back. So if you want to do the 4 view, and then if we hold the S key and go into the, the S key is actually for the XSI, excuse me. If we're in the perspective view and you hold the Z key and you left click, you will get this panning. And then if you hold the O key, left click, you get orbit. And if you hold the P key and you left click, you get a, basically a dolly, I guess that's what they call that. But the left click is the slow version. If you hold the P down, you can see here, there's these little hints down here, slow, medium, and fast. So when you hold the hot keys or sticky keys down, you'll get these little hints down here. So using the right, you can, go really fast. There is this, I'm trying to think here if this is the reset. Yeah, so there's a reset thing in here, because if you're holding the Z key and you're panning around, and then instead of hitting the left, if you're trying to do your habits from Maya or something else, you're going to use the left, middle, and right mouse buttons. And so if you're in this view here and you happen to hit the middle mouse or the right click, you'll see here it's not dollying the camera, it's doing like a lens zoom, and so that'll mess up your view. So you can go up here to the camera and you can hit the reset and it'll get you back to where you want to be. And so that's some basics here. There's also a way to save these positions, which is pretty cool. These little 4 buttons here are a way of like saving your camera position. So we'll left click one here, or maybe middle mouse click, yeah. And then we can move a view here, and we'll go orbit, and we'll zoom out, and then we'll middle click a view here. So those are like two memories. So if I hit left click there and then left click there with those saved, and if you right click, it'll get rid of them. It'll delete them. And so that's a way of, you know, setting some camera position so you don't have to fly the camera around and be all fiddly trying to get, if you have like a, I want to render, you know, make your render position cam here, and then you have another scene view from a different view here. You can save it to those different positions. Same with these down here. So those are some quick tips, little refresh. It is strange that there's this Z, you know, you hold the Z key with the left click and then you have to basically stretch over to O and P, which is on the other end of the keyboard. And with most apps, you know, even in Softimage here, you have the X, C, and the V for the, you know, translate, rotate, scale. X is scale, C is the rotate, and V is the translation. And that trend happens more often later with 3D apps. And so you would imagine the middle, you know, left click, middle mouse, and right click would drive a view, but that's how they work. So a little bit awkward keyboard reach to move your views around, but that's not too bad. Same over here. You can use the Z key, left click to move these guys, but you would use the middle and right click to zoom out here. This is the only way I know how to get these views to do that. And so that covers those bases. So let's start putting some geometry in here. We'll do we're in these, there's 4 modes in Softimage. They have this model, there's motion, which is for animation, and then there's this actor thing, which is rigging, and then there's matter, which is the lighting and shading and texturing. And at some point, because I never did visit this with the previous 2 videos, at some point we are going to rig up a character in Softimage. And so we'll visit this at some point in the future. But today we'll put together another basic scene like the first one, just make it a little nicer and cover all those bases now that we have this nice desktop capture version for recording for posterity and the accuracy of the desktop experience here. So let's get started. In the model panel, we'll go over here to get, and there's these little sub menus. And if we go down to primitive, we'll click again, and then we can go down to grid. We'll grab a grid and we'll let that cell count be 10, and it says it's a polygon, and so we'll just leave that default and let that guy land. And there's our grid, and I think we're gonna make that a little bigger later, but we won't now. And then so the next step here is selecting and deselecting, and right now we're in single mode versus multi. And the way that you engage this is you can't, you know, if you try to click around, you'll notice you can't do anything. Actually remember that being on the floor at SIGGRAPH and having the staff with the Softimage thing, you got to hold the space bar down. So you hold the space bar down like a sticky key, and it does that select. So then you can left click and then left click again, basically cycling through. And so we'll deselect that guy first, and we'll go over here to get, and we'll get another primitive, and we'll get a cube. And we'll make that, I don't think we need to be at 10, we'll make that 5. Yeah. And so there's our cube, and now we'll start moving this guy around. We'll deselect the cube by holding spacebar and still hold spacebar, left click that guy, and then we'll hit the X key. So you got X, C, V for the scale, rotate, and translation. And while we're on the X key, I'm going to use 2 axes. So I have the scale in X and scale in Y. So I'll hold the left and the right together and just scale this up uniform and make it pretty large. And spacebar deselect and get that guy selected. And then we'll move over to the V key and we'll translate this guy up in Y. Get him up here. And so then we'll go into, let's try to zoom into this guy here a little bit. And I think what we'll start to do here is go through the shading modes here. And so we have this cube on this surface, and it's in wireframe, which you can kind of decently see, but we're going to go up here to the shade tab here, and we'll go shade. And you can kind of see it when it goes into shade. There's like, you can kind of tell there's a little bit of a difference thing here. Let's go in orbit and see if we can. You can see it's because they have the same material. Here's a little highlight. They go see in the edge a little bit here. but it kind of disappears into itself if it's not shaded. And so I go and change the defaults here. And so what we'll do is we'll go into this setup here, and under the wire, you can do like shade, wireframe, all this kind of thing. There's like a matte, show you the alpha. Let's see what these look like. Depth Q, that's kind of neat, technical looking. We'll go back to shade, and then what we'll do is we'll go to this setup button. And this is something I usually use here, is we can go show icons. And then there's this hidden line, which is kind of neat. So we'll just do this first. And this is kind of a neat view. But what I prefer is I like having the shading with the hidden line on top of it. And that's a little tricky in the text here, because if we undo this and we hit this unselected highlights, it keeps the shaded mode and then wraps the wireframe around it, which I prefer. So now you kind of have a better view where you can see the little edges here. But even when you're over here, you can still see the highlights. So we covered that in the first video before. I just remind you that. And this is how I like to see the scene here. Hold the W key, we'll go down. And then we can also use, let's see if I go select the cube here. If we use A, we'll see all in these videos. Like I hit A on each of these things, and we can see everything. And if you have something selected, you can hit F and it'll fit it to your view. And so that's a way of getting that sussed out. So I think what I'll do is I'll save kind of a close-up of these guys here, and let's do like maybe a camera position here where we're seeing a little bit of everything. And then I'll middle mouse click that guy. And then I don't have to worry about zipping around and modeling with different views, because I can always go up here and go back to it. And get back to my camera view here. Okay, so let's tweak this guy, and we'll cover some other selection stuff here. So what I want to do is I don't want to render a plain cube, because that's fairly generic. And even though we can cut a soft shadow by using an area light off of this very sharp edged cube, if you've seen any of my previous videos, I like make the geometry round so that when we have reflections and highlights and things like this, that the geometry is more interesting to reflect and catch highlights. So we'll select this guy, and we're going to add edge loops, but we called them edge loops later. We're basically going to give it, subdivisions. And so we'll go over here to effect, and we'll go down to subdivision. And subdivision isn't quite like it is now. Like they called that rounding back then, where it not only adds geometry, but it smooths it at the same time. This subdivide is more like a linear subdivision. And so we'll go in here, we'll say we want, I think, if we use 2, because it's going to add them by that. Let me check. Okay, that's correct. If that was incorrect, we could go over here to history and click the undo. But yeah, it's asking how many, versus now you would probably say 3 subdivisions, and it would have those 3 cuts in it. But in this version of Softimage, is doing 2 loops basically on each face. And so this gives us some geometry to work with here, and we'll cover some of the some other selection modes here before we move forward. So one of the things that we need to do if we want to smooth this guy out the way we want is we need to do vert selections or face selections. And I can go over some face selections and vert selections. Is that there's some hot sticky keys for that. Let's see if we go. Right now we're in object mode, and there's these modes down here for selection, and then there's kind of like the center of the selection. So there's like local, global. These are kind of like, basically how the transforms would work when you have something selected. And so what we need is this tag mode. And what happens is you can do that, but you can also hit T, and it kind of sticky keys the tag mode. And then there's G, which is for the polygons. And so if I hold the G and then I left click here, you can see I can get polygon selected. You can also left click drag And that's kind of neat. And then you can see here, there's the hints while you're holding the sticky key here. So there's unselect polygon. So if we use the middle mouse, we can, can be a little sloppy with our selection and then middle mouse away what we don't want. So there's that. And then there's also the same thing if we use T, which is for the verts here. And that's how we're going to move these. We're going to move the verts. We're going to move these spans towards the edges so that when we do run a smooth subdivision, which is called rounding, that it subdivides nicely, like as if I was going to do an edge bevel, but edge bevel didn't exist at this time. So what we'll do is we'll hold the T down, I'll middle or left click, drag across here. And now we want to scale these guys up. So we'll use the X. And right now we're still in this object mode. So if we're scaling X and we go, hey, I want to scale in Y, you'll notice it'll scale the whole object. So we have to switch over to the tag mode. And now I should be able to scale up only the tags. And so we're doing that. Now that's there, and I'm going to hold the T again to, whoops, that was left. I have to middle mouse click to deselect. And we'll grab the two spans in the middle. Same thing, we're in tag mode, and then we want to scale in Z. So we'll go here. Pretty good. And then we also just need to get this middle span here. So hold the T, middle mouse deselect, left mouse select, and then we're going on X, and it's saying X is the L key. So here, now we moved all our spans to the edges. We'll go back to object tag mode and hold the space bar. There we go. Oops, yeah, grab that guy. And now we want to, well, I should probably deselect those guys. Here we go. Now we're in object selection again, and we'll at the object level we'll hit the effect and we'll do a rounding, and I leave it at 0.5. It does a pretty good smooth, and then we'll do one more. I usually do it twice. So let's go back to effect, rounding, enter, and there we go. We've got a nice rounded out cube that'll catch some detail and cast some nice shadows and everything. And we're basically going to do that again for a couple of other shapes here. So we get this cool thing. All right, so now we have some cool geometry to render. And let's take a test. We'll do a test render now, and then we'll start adding materials and things. So we have a neat little scene here. We'll start doing materials. So let's go from model over to matter, which is where all the material and rendering options are. And we'll start right off, and we're going to go just check this as a render. Go down here to preview, but before we render all, we're going to go down to setup. And in setup, you can see the preview render is set to Softimage. And instead, we're going to switch that over to mental ray. And anti-aliasing is off, which we are okay with because we want to leave that kind of in preview mode just to see what we're looking at without making it spend a lot of time to draw. We'll do the slow draw at the end when we know what we're getting and we're happy with what we're getting. So we'll leave the quality low and the resolution low. So let's fire off a render. Wait, before we do, I actually don't want to do that because I need a light. So we'll go over here to light, and then we'll define a light, and I want to do a spotlight. And if you pick a spotlight, you have the option to turn on this area light here. And we'll leave the samples at 3. This is like for shadows. And we'll do ray trace. And I'm going to leave this umbra here so you can see what's going on before we turn it off. And turn the cone angle up a little bit. We'll kind of leave this default here so you can kind of just get a look at it. And now that we've added a light, it's really dark in the scene because this is the only light in the scene instead of the default ambience. So let's go back here and let's press A on these so we can kind of see the scene here. We have this light selected. And I'm going to go to the move tool and we'll pull this out. Oh, I'm grabbing everything here. So I need a space deselect and just select the light. I'm still grabbing everything. If I fit this here, space, deselect. I want to deselect that and only select the light. Yeah, it's giving me the, let me see here. It's stuck for some reason. Let's do drag here. There we go. Okay, so that's working better here. That was my selection mode was wrong. So I'm pulling the light around. You can see here I got a little kind of the preview window showing me how the spotlight's working in the little area that it's hitting. And you'll notice that even though I'm moving this spotlight, that there's like a card floating with it, and it's staying a certain direction. And so what we have to do here is we'll go into info, selection, and we have to go down here to relative orientation for the card here for the area light. This is a rectangle, sphere, or disc. I got it on rectangle, so we have a cool thing here. And then you'll see that now is facing the way that the area light is. Okay, I'm gonna hit all on these guys, and yeah, we'll move this guy over here. And we'll move him up. And then we'll take a look at the scene, see what we have. Just to see what we're looking at here. So I'll preview all with soft mental ray, and we'll see what we're looking at. And because we haven't set the aliasing very high and we haven't changed the sampling, even on this O2, this is a 400 megahertz O2, that we have a pretty decently fast preview render. And so what do we see? We see that we have there's shadows, but you can see that they're very they're almost like the geometry is transparent. And then we have this fall off here, and there's a soft edge to this whole thing. And then there's kind of this dark around it, but you can still see the floor, and there's reasons for all this. And I did explain that in the first video, but I'll get into that again here. So the first thing is that the shadow itself, if we go into the light, it defaults. I'm not sure why. There was a lot of this in the early CGI days where they would have these weird defaults. And so this umbra intensity is at 750. If we turn this down to 0, that should make the shadows like perfectly black. I'm going to change this cone angle to like 50. I'm going to change the spread angle to like 10. Oops, that's not 10. That's 10. There we go. And we'll hit OK. And now it's a wider area. And just to preview before we get into anything else, let's check it again. And so now we should have solid shadows, at least up to a certain point we'll have solid shadows, where that umbra, anything above 0 is going to basically make the shadow, it's almost like saying transparency. That umbra is almost like saying shadow transparency. So if you have it above 0, you're going to get shadows that don't feel physically correct. And I'm sure there was reasons for that, just like using the ambient light here. And so that solves one problem. The other problem is that area that you saw that's outside of the shadow isn't perfectly dark, and that's this ambience lighting. And its default is 3. This is actually useful because it creates the sense in simpler scenes, in like scenes that are simple directional lighting. This gives you a sense that there's some bounced light. It creates the illusion of bounced lighting. And so if we turn this down to 0, you'll see that the area outside the spotlight is now pitch black. There's no sense of the floor past the edge of the spotlight. And we're going to turn that back on because I tend to use ambient lighting versus GI in a lot of these old school renders, because you save a ton of time, but you get a very visually pleasing, almost GI effect going on here. And so cool. So we got this neat little render, and it has highlights, but these are specular highlights. And I want to invoke actual reflections. And I stray away because now all the physical base renderers that are in the modern time, they just use reflection blurring like it would be. But in the old VFX days, you know, to have a fast render, you had these specular hits that emulated that same idea as if this was a, you know, rough surface, and then you put a little bump map on it with that kind of spread specular highlight, and it would create a very similar effect to what you would do with like blurred reflections today. Okay, so let's move this guy a little bit further away here and a little bit up. Pull him back a bit. And the other thing we need to do is we want the shadow to be a little bit softer. And so I'm going to take that area light here, and we're going to, oh, we have this all set up, but we want to change the scale of the area light. So if we switch over to the scale mode, you'll see if you scale on Y, it's making that card larger. Scale on Z is making it larger. So we're just making it like just like a large chimera, you know, box light on a real lighting thing here. This is going to create a larger diffuse shadow. So instead of sharper shadows, you get these softer shadows. And then also when we create a reflector card, we're going to put behind there, it'll look a lot more physically accurate, because you would have a reflection if you had a big chimera box lighting the scene. So let's just look at that. Let's take a look at this, how much softer the shadows are. Yeah, these are really, really soft now. They're going to be a little bit noisy and shredded because we have the samples turned down. Yeah, it's a little bit more visually pleasing here. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, now we're going to get into, I'm going to put the atmosphere back. I'm going to put some ambience back. I'll put that back at 3. Give us a little thing here. And so the next thing we need to do is we'll give these guys different surfaces. So I'll grab the sphere. Let's do, when we go over here to material, and it'll grab the material on the sphere. We'll call this the, which one should this be? Green sphere. Go specular. Turn the specular off completely. 0, 0, 0. Diffuse, and we'll make this green. Here, turn it up a smidge. And then on reflectivity, I'll go 120 or 0.120. And that should give us enough to work with for the sphere. So we got the green sphere. And then we'll take the space, select that guy. I'm sure this is just going to be straight reflection. I don't think we're going to, it doesn't have Fresnel built in, and I might be able to find a way to plug Fresnel into it, but we're not going to do that for this one. And then what else do we need? So they'll reflect each other. Let's check this out here. So we've got this kind of setup where there's no specular, and they are reflecting. You can kind of see some reflections happening. But yeah, you can kind of see some mild reflection happening. But we have this light, and there's no highlight from the light. Now that's one reason, is because we've removed the specular from the shader. But if we create a reflector card, then it will return that highlight as it would look if it was an actual square light box lighting it. And so we'll do that. And then I think what we should do is we'll add a texture. I don't think I covered adding a texture in the first video that I did for this, so we'll cover that too. So let's get another primitive, get another grid. We don't need 10 by 10. We need just 1 by 1. Hit OK. And then let's move that guy down here. Scale him up. Let's rotate, get that rotated over. So we can kind of match where it is. And then we want to rotate it on, what is that, X? No, undo. Oh, I'm on the wrong, let's see, undo local. I'm on the wrong thing here. So let's see if we, now we rotate that on X. There we go. Yeah, I was in the wrong mode here, so it wasn't rotating locally. And that kind of looks like it's lining up here with the shape of that. And then we'll move this on Y and put that just behind this guy. This back here, maybe scale it up a little bit more. So yeah, got a big old reflector card. And then we have to give that a material. So we'll go to hold that material. This one is a reflector card. And we just need a constant. We don't need really any shading, just constant white. And ta-da. Okay, so there we go. And I guess let's take a look at that. And then we'll add some, yeah, there we go. You're starting to see here in on the green sphere, you can see that reflecting there. And the red cube is just on the end. Maybe I should rotate the cube a little bit over so we can catch the light a little bit better, but it'll be easier to see when we scale up the render as well. All right, so let's select the floor. Let's get this texture figured out. Let's do a texture. Let's do a 2D local. And let's see if we can remember how this goes. We want this to be tiled like that, but we need the image. So let's see if we can select this here. If I can remember how the database worked. Let's go back. Material library. Textures 3D. Now pictures. Tilings. Yeah, here we go. So there's this, and we want a checker. Kind of remember what these look like here. Okay, I know we want the checker, so we'll load that. And there it is. Now we want this to be mapped locally on its UV because it's laying flat. So we want it to be X, Y. No, we want it to be X and Z. So if we go X and Z, there we go. And then we repeat, this would be once across the whole thing. So we want more than that. So let's do 4 maybe, 4 and 4 and check that. Let's see if we can rotate the sphere, or we want to rotate this cube a little bit here. See if we can catch a little bit more of the highlight. And maybe we can scale this guy up a little bit more, give a little bit more light on it. Oops. This guy's a little bit more separation here. And let's see what it looks like. Oh, that's the full render. Which is, now this is separate. So you have this preview render. This is good to cover. You have the preview render set up, and then you have the full render set up. And we would ultimately pick this and then match all these settings here. Let me see here. Yeah, we turn on the anti-aliasing. We do a whole setup thing here with these options. We get all this aligned up with what we did with the preview. Can't remember if there's a way to do that, like to tell it to just grab what's in the, there was a way at some point, I don't remember if it was this or XSI, where you could basically be like, tell the preview to use the final render or whatever, but let's not do that. So we're still going to preview, only I want to make this a little bigger in a minute. So I guess let's test our the checker on the floor, see if it's the amount of repeats that we want. It's pretty good. Maybe I'll do 5, one more, make them a little smaller than that. That's looking pretty good. Yeah, we have it. You can kind of see the highlight out the cube. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Okay, so let's just get this going now. So we have that. So let's just turn everything up here. Go to setup, and we want this to be like, we'll make this like 1280 by 720. And then we'll go into, yeah, mental ray, and we want anti-aliasing on now. So we're gonna make this active. And I'll turn this to, instead of -2 min and 0 for max, I'm gonna go 0 for min and 2 for max. So it's really gonna spend some time on that. But we also want triangle. This will be super sharp. And then the adaptive sampling, I'm gonna make the 0.1 as it's gonna sample until there's a 0.1 difference. So it's gonna be a little bit tighter in its crispness. And we'll do okay on that. Okay, and then we still have to, let's go back here and change our texture so that it's repeating 5 times. Okay, and then let's do a render. Okay, so here's our final render. Looks pretty good. Got it, you know, nice crisp edges that are anti-alias nicely, and good soft shadows. I may have left the ambience up a little too high, might be a little too bright in the shadows, but it's a pretty good render for our demo purposes today. And you can see here that here's this Softimage 3D from the mid-90s. Can still produce a pretty solid image if you know how to use it properly. And we got our little reflector card up there, making the spotlight and the reflections feel motivated by something versus the specular, which gives it a little bit more of that 90s render look, which we will get into. I think with this archive VFX, we're going to do some 90s era looking stuff as well, instead of trying to make these render engines look like modern render engines, these old ones. So there you go. There's a good revamp of the original tutorial, now with a full clean desktop capture versus a camera on a tripod. So that's a little bit more one-to-one experience, like being at the desktop. So mid mouse button here, and see, I'll save this guy off for, try this. Did everything right except for name the scene. Okay. Boom. There are 1 picked in the scene of which stored outside the database. Copy, yep. All right. Basically taking that checker and moving it across the database there. All right, let's exit out of here. Exit out of Softimage, and there you go. Thanks for watching.